Welcome, everyone, to the Leading Edge podcast, episode 1 by the National Flight Training Alliance. I'm Katie Braddick, joined by my co-host, Zofia Costa.
Hi. Today's conversation is all about mentorship, how it shapes learning, leadership, and the safety culture that defines aviation. Joining us are two incredible guests, Paul Preidecker, who is the president of the National Association of Flight Instructors. Paul has more than 35 years of experience in aviation training and education, having served as a chief flight instructor, examiner, and an airline captain. He's contributed to several FAA and industry working groups, presented at major aviation conferences like Watts, and continued to shape the future of flight instruction through his work with NAFI and training organizations across the country. And next we have Jeffrey Madison, who's a Harvard-educated flight instructor, mentor pilot, author, and airline pilot. With nearly 3 decades of flying experience, Jeffrey has given over 1,500 hours of instruction and flown to more than 250 general aviation airports across the U.S. He's well known for his human factors column, analyzing NASA reports, and is the author of Yikes, 100 Smart Pilots and the Dumb Things They Did, Yet Lived to Tell Them About. Through his nonprofit, the Victor Kilo Fund, he helps provide aerospace scholarships and supports the next generation of aviators.
To be here.
Yeah. Very excited to have you guys. We're going to discuss how mentorship connects the dots between students and instructors, explore leadership, and what you guys have to give to us young people over here. So very excited to get your perspective. So first, I want to start off with asking you guys, what drew you both to aviation industry?
My story is not very similar to everybody else's. I was 9 years old in 3rd grade, and we were called out to the playground because there was a special guest out in the playground. He was Captain Dan, a WMAL traffic helicopter reporter and pilot, and he'd landed his Bell 47 at the playground, and we were going out there to talk to him and hear what it was all about. And I was hooked from that time on. But because I didn't know anything about aviation, I didn't know anybody in it, I didn't know how to pursue it, none of my friends were interested in it. I really didn't become a pilot at all until I started taking helicopter flight lessons when I was 32 years old. My entire life, I built models. I went to air shows as an adult. But yeah, and I read Aviation Week and Space Technology, Flying Magazine, all of it. Even subscribed to AOPA magazine. But yeah, didn't start flying till I was 32.
It seems like we have similar stories. And I think it's probably true of a lot of people. You get an intro ride or a spark or an introduction to aviation early on, and that kind of stays with you until you kind of sort out a life plan. And for me, it was a bit of the same. 9 years old, fellow that owned an airport, gave me a ride, and I thought, boy, I'd like this. Both my parents were in the Second World War. My mom was in the RAF. My dad was in the American Air Force. So of course he certainly, was encouraging about, flying. But, somewhere we got off on different tracks, went to college and, took on some different careers, all the while thinking, gee, this year I'd like to learn to fly, or next year I want to learn to fly, or New Year's Eve would come and I'd say, okay, my resolution is going to be able to learn to fly next year. And when I was 34, I was sitting on the sofa one night reading some things about marketing, because that was my career at the time. And I thought, instead of saying this year or next year, maybe you should say tomorrow. I'm going to learn to fly. So tomorrow came, and I called up a local airport and I said, hey, I'm going to take flying lessons. And the lady said, when do you want to start? And I said, how about in 10 minutes? She said, come on out. And that's kind of what got it started. No real idea that I would ever turn it into a professional career. I thought I would just fly for fun. Maybe teach, things like that. But it actually turned out that led to a 20-year career in the airlines. So it was a big step to make that phone call and say, I'm coming out in 10 minutes. That got it started.
It's so interesting that because our lives are very similar that way. I got into flying because I was burned out from my other career. I had been a writer in Hollywood for 7 years and had done okay, but had never really broke through and made it really big. My goal had been to become so successful that I could buy my own plane, learn how to fly, and just kind of fly around. But that never really happened, and I got so sort of burnt out about it that I decided that I needed to do something different, and I ended up taking writing freelance articles for magazines. And as a result of that, I met a guy who owned his own flight school. He was a Jamaican track star who had a horrible leg injury, and as a result, could no longer run track for the Jamaican Olympic team. But he decided he was going to learn to fly helicopters, and he ended up buying the flight school that he learned to fly helicopters from. And I thought that was so interesting. I would write
That's
an
one way to
article
do
about it.
it.
That's right. And so I wrote an article about it. And 18 months after I wrote the article, he called me up and said, "I need you to come down and talk to me. I got something for you." And he showed me the article. He had like laminated it on wood. It wasn't even just in frame. He had laminated it on wood and said, "That article got me so much traffic. If you keep writing for me, I'll teach you to fly helicopters." So at that point, my life began to change back to what I really wanted to always do, which was fly. And I met two Tuskegee Airmen who were at the time in their 80s. And I told them I'd really like to kind of figure out what to do, maybe something professionally, but I just don't know. And they mentored me and guided me. And that's how I ended up as an airline pilot. And that's how I actually got started into mentoring because I wanted to give back for what they did.
Yeah, I like yourself. I had two previous careers. I came out of university with a degree in biochemistry and went to work doing biochemistry research at a cancer center in Texas for 2 or 3 years. And then I thought, well, some business background wouldn't be bad. So I became VP of marketing for a company that made biomedical research equipment. And I was there 16 years. Midway through that career is when I took my first lesson. The gentleman who owned the airport was very encouraging of me to work through the ratings. And he said, if you work through your commercial, he said, I'll put you to work as a part-time instructor. And I thought, okay. So I did that for a while. And then on my 16th year with this company, I got called into the office and they said, we're reorganizing and you're not part of our future and you've got 5 minutes to get out. And I thought,
Whoa.
oh, okay. So of course I thought, well, I need to hurry up and get a job just like I had because that's what I was used to. But after looking at a couple of offers, I thought, no, I'm not going to go back and do that again. Instead of showing up at the airport part-time to teach, I'm going to try to show up full-time and actually make a living at it. And had I not done that, I wouldn't have had a path to the airlines. So, I took a circumstance that was a little bit uncomfortable for a while, and I thought, let's take this as an opportunity to do something different.
Jeffrey, I know that you mentioned your mentorship. What was the importance of that mentorship and how did they support you in your career? And Paul, if you can think of any mentorship as well.
I've got it.
I mean, I've got to say it was everything. Um, when I was younger, I didn't have any mentors in that regard. So I didn't go into flying when I was younger. When I was older, I was fortunate enough to recognize I had a couple of really cool older gentlemen who were willing to take me under their wing and talk to me about stuff and guide me in the way that would put me in a position to get hired by the airlines pretty quickly and at kind of an advanced age. And if they hadn't done that, I probably would have been honestly, probably a full-time teacher in middle school in Hawthorne, California. That would have been my next career. And I say that only because in order to pay for flight school, I walked away from Hollywood as soon as I had the opportunity. But in order to pay for flight school and maintain the family at the time and do all the things you need to do an adult in your mid-30s, I was a full-time teacher at Hawthorne a middle school in Hawthorne, California. And so I was willing to do that for the rest of my life and just be like a part-time CFI. But because of their mentorship, it turned into something much greater. It turned into an airline career.
And when we talk about mentorship, Katie, it to me, if I think about what are the qualities of a mentor, one of them certainly has to be the ability to create opportunities, just like you were talking about, Jeffrey. For me, the fellow that owned the airport where I learned to fly, like 8 miles west of here, I went through private pilot training and it was during my training for my instrument rating that he and I were flying together, and he said, "You know, I I, I like your style and your proficiency." And he said, I think after we finish your instrument rating, you should just get going with your commercial." And then he said, "I'll have an opportunity for you as an instructor." And just, what does that take for somebody to create that? It, it's certainly not one way. I mean, in order to be a mentor, you need a mentee, you know, who's receptive, willing to take on, challenges, even if they're not particularly easy. But then you need that support from somebody who's kind of been there, done that. And the same at the airlines. I don't know what your experience was, Jeffrey, at the airlines. For me, I was pretty scared because in my class, there was a class of 20, and I was the only one in class without previous airline experience. Everybody else had been flying, turboprops or light jets in other airlines, and they were now coming to this airline to move on in their career. And I was the only one without any of that experience. So the whole idea about what the day in the life of an airline pilot was, I didn't really know. So I had some opportunities to ask lots of questions, but I thought to myself, if I have to answer every one of these questions, I'll talk myself out of this. I'm going to just go with the flow here and learn as much as I can and get in the system. And I remember after I had finished training and I was online, I was listening to a conversation in one of the crew rooms, and the conversation went something like, "Did you hear about that guy that got hired and he's already a captain here? Holy cow, he was flying Cessnas out of a cornfield before he came here," which was pretty much the truth. So, but he took advantage of opportunities, right?
Yeah, I agree with that. Mentorship is being receptive is definitely one aspect of it, right? Because I think I had people sometimes say that timing is everything, or you get what you want, or you get what you need when you need it.
Mhm.
And at the time that I was becoming an airline pilot, going through all of the training, I needed to know that I was coachable. And prior to that, I kind of wasn't a coachable person, but I got to the point in my life where I actually saw sort of my foibles and flaws and realized, okay, I'll do whatever it takes to change that. And once I became coachable, mentors showed up in my life, like the Tuskegee Airmen. I met two great astronauts, Stephanie Wilson and Dr. Yvonne Cagle, two black and female astronauts who showed me how, hey, it might be hard to do something, but if you have the persistence and you certainly have the skill, Jeffrey, this is something you can achieve. And then also I had mentors in at Long Beach City College who talked about the airline industry as cyclical and what to expect and how you should prepare for the vicissitudes, the ups and downs of it. And then when I got hired, somebody took me aside who had been in the airlines before and told me how to kind of prepare when you go to induction training at the airlines. Phrase is they're gonna hit you with a fire hose of information, right? All this information is gonna come at you so fast, you're gonna get knocked down. And but the idea is if you just remember three things: your flows, your procedures, four things: your call outs and your profiles,
Mhm.
five things: your checklist. Then if you get those kind of honed, then you're going to be okay. And then the airline's going to take care of the rest. And so nobody had told me anything like that previously about the airlines. And so that helped me kind of get situated. I was scared when I'm on my first day because it wasn't because there were so many people who had had previous airline experience in my first class. It's there so many had come from the Air Force Academy and
Oh, yeah.
and the Coast Guard Academy and the Naval Academy, right? So these guys were all super sharp. I'm like, well, I'm just a CFI guy. How am I going to How am I going to get on? So, yeah.
You guys have both talked about fear and of the new class and coming from just a completely different background to what skills and like what type of resilience did you guys have to build to get through that?
I was 44, when I went into my first, airline class. and had done quite a bit of other things in different industries. Plus, as a part-time instructor, I had amassed about 5,000 hours of time, most of it instructing. I was pretty confident that I could probably figure this out. And again, I think that it comes with, a little bit of worn tread, um, just kind of living through life experiences and things. The thing that I was most nervous about was working in a crew environment because, okay, you can think about instructing as a crew environment, but not exactly. It's a different dynamic. And I thought, I've been essentially single pilot, but doing a lot of instructing. Can I make this transition? Flying with somebody new all the time. And I basically said, well, if this is, I made a conscious decision to make a career change and come to the airline, do what you need to do and learn from others, right? And I mean, everybody knows this, and I'm sure the two of you have already noticed this. There are lessons to learn from everybody. Some of them are lessons that you want to aspire to be like, and some of them are lessons that you learn to say, I don't want to be like that. And you need to know the difference. Jeffrey's right. It was a fire hose, and I heard that expression a lot, and I felt like it. And then when I was on the teaching side of things at the airline, I was holding the hose, right? so, so I just think it was a matter of confidence and just being dedicated and say, hey, I want this. Um, when I knew that I had a chance to get a class date, a friend of mine, he said, how'd your interview go? And I said, well, I'm kind of scared. And Mike said, what are you scared about? And I said, I'm scared they're going to say yes. Because now I have to make a decision about, how this is going to be. As I said, I was 44 at the time. I didn't want to be 50 looking back saying, boy, I wish I would have done that. I'd rather be 50 looking back saying that was stupid or it was really cool. Yeah, it was really
Mhm.
cool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
When
Yeah.
I also had some life experience under my belt, so I had some confidence. But I think most pilots are pretty confident people because it's a skill set that requires it, and also it's a unique position to be in to call yourself a pilot on any level, whether you're a private pilot or an airline captain. And so there's a certain amount of pride that comes into it, and I think pride was part of the thing too. I remember when I was learning to hover as a student pilot in helicopters, and I couldn't get it. I just couldn't get the aircraft to just hover in place. I just kept this all over the place. And the lesson was coming to an end, and Robin Petgrave, who was my CFI, looked at me and said, "Yeah, you'll get it tomorrow." And we took the aircraft back to the tie down area, and I got in the car and I went, "How does he know that? How does he know I'm going to get it tomorrow?" But I went to sleep and I woke up and I came down the next day for lessons, and the next day I learned I was hovering. And I think part of it is being able to believe that somebody believes in you and your skill, even when you don't believe in you. And if I'm really dead serious on this, what I say, if he hadn't said that, I don't think I would have hovered the next day and gotten the hover down. But because he said it, not only did I get the hover down, my learning accelerated a lot. I mean, I really began to get everything all at once, and and so that's the kind of thing that I like to try and remember when I'm talking to students as a mentor pilot here at PSA Airlines or as an AOPA mentor pilot. When I'm with a student and they're kind of having a bad day, or they're something about their life is just not going well, and it's affecting their ability to operate the aircraft. I, I just remind them, you'll get it tomorrow, and I'll remind myself that I believe in you, even when you don't believe in you.
I think that's a key mentorship quality, actually, is to have the first of all to have the skill set to recognize that the people we're working with are making progress and that they will get it. I'm thinking to myself, while you were learning to hover, which seems like an impossible skill, I was struggling doing a crosswind landing. But eventually, the pieces came together. And the other part once I started flight training, I knew I wasn't going to stop. I mean, I didn't know where it was going to take me, but I knew I wasn't getting off the sidewalk. I knew I was going to keep going, and being offered an opportunity to teach. I at the time when I was still working as a VP, I thought this is the best of both worlds. I've got a real job, it's paying the bills, and I'm teaching part time, which is my fun job. And this will be my life going forward, and it'll be great until the VP thing went away, and I had to make some other decisions. And like I said, I could have taken the easy path, which would be just go get another, corporate type job and stay in that mold, or get out of that mold and take the next step.
You chose to take the not easy path, and I think that's what I like to remind people. And when I was going through it too, every time I go through it, I remind people that you didn't choose to take the easy path, right? Which means you've got something in you, and so that means you're probably going to do all right because you made the decision to take the difficult path.
And I mean, learning to fly, I mean, it's a badge of honor. I think, when we all get through this and we make our achievements, whatever they happen to be. I mean, some people aspire to, directly to the airlines, or they're happy doing flight instructing, or maybe they want to open up their own flight school. There's so many opportunities in today's world, and not just for pilots, but everything in aviation you can probably make a connection to no matter what your interests are. But I just felt that teaching was a way to do what I enjoyed. When I was in university, I was a tutor for people in the sciences, tutored lab experiments and things like that. And people said, "Oh, you do this well." So I had a little bit of that. And then when I decided to, follow the path of being an instructor, there was two things that motivated me. One was I wanted to be better. I was a pilot, and teaching is a good way to do that. And plus, I wanted to help people who needed help. So, it's all kind of part and parcel of a mentorship. Is you get back, you share your experiences. It's an opportunity to learn.
I
Yep.
agree. But to touch back on what Jeffrey said, having that push from someone that you look up to and that confidence that, like, oh, I can do it, is so important. And I know you both touched on mentors and mentees and how they both correlate to each other. And to be a good mentor, you have to be a good mentee and vice versa. In your opinions and perspectives, what makes a good teachable student? And how can instructors and CFIs, and how can even mentees be better to create the culture of trust and curiosity between each other?
I think it's important to know that this whole process is not a one-way street. Like the expression goes, it takes two to tango, right? And I think that what makes a teachable student probably goes back to the laws of learning about being ready and being motivated, and you have the time, and you've got all those sort of things laid out. But I think from the instructor and mentor standpoint, he or she has to be willing to learn from the student, because like I said, it's not one way. And I've learned things about myself and about teaching just by getting feedback, from the people, that I'm working with. And some of those lessons are the best ones, because I try to put myself out there, not certainly not as a know-it-all, because I don't. I try to look at it as just a collegial relationship between two people. And hey, we're in this together. Give people the right to be wrong. And from a student standpoint, um, like I said, the feedback that I would get was, pretty valuable to me about how to do things better. And the world has changed in aviation. The two of you are in this world. It's represents a change from how I did it, for sure. In the classes we had, if somebody showed up with a commercial single or a commercial multi-engine instrument certificate, I used to know what that meant. But I don't know what that means anymore, because everybody's coming at it from different experiences, different demographics. We could get into the whole time versus experience debate with the rules and regs. To me, it's all part of it. But I remember near the end of my career, our new hire classes had people in it that ranged anywhere in age from 23 to about 58. And I can tell you for sure that the 58-year-old really appreciated a stand-up lecture discussion format. The 23-year-olds, I can assure you, would have preferred we just hand everything to them on an iPad and say, here, learn this and come back in a month. So when you're designing curriculum and you're an instructor, you have to be conscious of the fact it's not a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approach to learning anymore. And if you don't know that and you don't embrace it, it's going to be hard.
I have three quick stories I think that'll illustrate. The first one was about what I think it takes to be a student. And that is, had already been at the airlines for a year, and I was now going to be a CRJ 200 first officer. It was my first jet. It's a 50-seat jet, and I had come off a 19-seat turboprop where we had no autopilot, no flight director, no flight bathroom, and no cockpit door.
Was
So
it a
now
Beech 1900?
it was a Jetstream 32,
Got it.
the no plane. That's what we used to
Yeah,
call it.
got it.
Because it had. So I'm in class, and this was at a time in the airline industry. This was right after 9/11. So the airline industry was in a slump, and my airline was looking for ways to wash people out because they'd overhired. So they weren't yet furloughing, but they were trying to wash people out in class. And so anything that you could do to make the instructor not like you was a way to get washed out. This was back when things were a lot more subjective than they are now in terms of training. And so I remember having a particularly interesting sim session where I had done a few things wrong, but in my mind, I knew what I had done wrong, and I was fully prepared to fully explain in a debrief to the instructor what I did wrong, so that he knew that I was on my game, that I didn't just mess this up because I didn't know what the heck I was doing in a jet. So we get to the debrief after the 4-hour sim. We go into the class, and he points out something, and I immediately launch into this 5-minute explanation of what was going on in my mind and how I do it. And he just looked at me and said, "You sure like to talk a lot, Madison." And it was at that moment that I realized, after being quiet for about 10 seconds and the room being uncomfortably quiet, that, oh, this guy just wants you to say yes, go along, and get along. And if you don't, he will find a way to get rid of you. He already had that reputation. I didn't believe it, but after that moment, I realized that. So that's the rest of my sim sessions were, yes, sir, you're right, won't happen again. Thank you. And I got through training. So that's the moment I realized that a good student is somebody who can recognize the situation and absorb the information, even if it's not being told. But the atmosphere is indicating such that would make. So I became a better student as a result, right? I got through my training. I remember the moment that I realized, oh, I'd be a pretty good CFI. I had taken my friend flying. We departed Santa Monica. He had just gotten his private pilot license. I was a freshly minted instrument pilot, and I might have had 10 or 15 hours hard instrument right after that. And I said, "Hey, let's go flying, and we'll go punch the clouds. It'll be fun." So we took off from Santa Monica, headed west out over the ocean. And in June, you get a marine layer. The inland part of Santa, like 5 miles off the coast, it's completely Kavu, but 2 feet off there are clouds. So we take off toward the clouds. I turn us to avoid the clouds, and I said, "Here, why don't you take the airplane for a minute? We'll fly up the coast." And so he took the airplane. Everything was good. Then he said, "Well, let's take a right here." And he turned right over Pacific Palisades, and immediately we hit a cloud. And as he was turning, I could see as he was turning that he was gonna start to roll. I could see it before he did it. And he did exactly what I thought he was going to do, that I'd seen. And so as he began to roll, I went, "Here you go. Let's just level off a little bit here. Just, yeah, use your right arm, level that, and let's just add a little power. Keep it there. You're good." I got the airplane. because he didn't have any he had 3 hours of hood. He didn't really have
Mhm.
any instrument training. And at that moment, I realized that's what my CFIs were talking about, that they could see stuff before a student did it. And I just did that. And because I just saw that, I went, "Oh, I might be a pretty good CFI. Now that I understand, I can see stuff before it happens."
And that's the key to being an instructor is being able to anticipate what's about to happen before it does. And you can either let it happen, if it's within the boundaries of safety, or you can say, I've seen enough, I need to, curtail this. And I, I used to tell people all the time, and I still firmly believe this, that I'm probably the best pilot I've ever seen, unless I'm flying the airplane.
That's funny. That's good. I like that.
If I'm sitting in the jump seat, watching what's going on around me, I don't miss a thing. If I'm sitting back in a simulator, I don't miss a thing. Hook me to the yoke,
Not so much.
that's right.
That's a good one. I like that. Can I borrow that?
You got it.
All right. And then the third story real quick is, when I was going through CFI training school, I guess it was a 141. American Flyers at the time was based in Santa Monica. It was 30 days to get your CFI, right? So you were at school in the schoolhouse every day for like 10 hours, and doing everything possible. It's 30 days to get your CFI written, and then of course, you had to take the check ride in the oral. And at one point, there were 9 of us together. We were like really working hard, but we had all come to this impasse where the learning wasn't happening. And it hit me, hey, let's just for giggles, let's put all these regulations on poster board and hang them up around the walls of the room, and then do some funny squiggles or something on each one of them. And for whatever reason, that sort of like broke whatever impasse we all had, and we were able to learn the regs much more quickly and turning it into kind of a game. And that's when I realized, oh, that's another way to be a good student, is to be willing, and instructor is to be willing to try something different to get the learning to go in.
Well, and you also touched on another thing about what makes a good student. If we had a class of, say, 10 individuals, they would arrange, usually with the hotel that they were staying at, to corner off part of the breakfast area for group study sessions. If I saw 9 out of the 10 in a group study session, I was worried about the one who wasn't participating, because CRM starts on your first day of class. It doesn't start the first time you're in the airplane with a crew member. It starts in class, because everybody needs everybody to help support this effort to get through. And again, because people are bringing various levels of experience, it's important to tap into that. So this idea about working together, I mean, we talk about being single pilot, but even then, even when you're the only one in the airplane, there's no such thing as single pilot. It's a crew team effort, no matter what you're doing. From the fuel that puts the fuel in the truck, part of the team. ATC is part of the team. Everybody's part of the team, and you need to, especially in the airline world, you need to buy into that pretty quick. You can't be a standalone.
That's right. I remember as a CFI, there had been a student who maybe 3 or 4 CFIs had worked with, and she wasn't advancing. And so it was my turn. And when I met her, she was wearing high heels and wanted to wear high heels in the airplane because that's what she was comfortable wearing, because this was a businesswoman. And that apparently was the problem, that nobody could convince her not to wear high heels while flying, because it was interrupting her ability to handle the rudders. And so people just kind of gave up. And so what I did was I asked her if she wouldn't be so kind as to go into the airplane. It was a Cessna 172, and I'm going to stand outside and go in the airplane and look at me, close the door and look at me. So she closed the door, opened the window, looked at me and said, "Yeah, what?" And I said, "You know what? You look fantastic in the airplane, and you're going to look fantastic in the airplane, but nobody's going to know if you wear boots or sneakers or whatever shoes are appropriate for being able to handle the rudders. When you land, if you bring those high heels with you in a bag, when you land and after they chalk the tires and all that good stuff and tie down, before you get out, if you switch into the high heels, nobody will ever know you didn't fly that airplane with high heels on. And she looked at me and she closed the window, opened the door, and walked away. And I thought, oh man, I didn't mean to, but I probably just insulted her. So I go back into the FBO and I'm standing there, and then Joe Justice looks at me and goes, "What happened?" I go, "I think I blew it." 3 minutes later, she comes walking through the door with her high heels that she throws into a bag, made very big deal of showing that she'd done that. And I look at her feet and she's wearing sneakers.
Here we go.
We got her to solo, and then she got her private. And it was all about, for me, what I learned from that was you got to know how a student sees the world, right? And how they see themselves in the world, and how that relates to how they're going to fly. And I'm really grateful for that opportunity, because if I didn't have that opportunity to work with that student, I wouldn't have had that breakthrough. So just like Paul said earlier, I learned about teaching from that.
Just as a way to kind of turn the dialogue around a little bit, if at the end of a lesson, if a student said, "Well, thanks for the lesson," I would always say, "No, thank you for the lesson." Because again, it's a two-way thing, and I think we need to remember that. It's also important that as we do this more and more and more, that we don't distance ourselves from what it felt like when we were first starting out. This idea about being empathetic goes a long way, because, okay, I've got 5,000 hours in the back of the sim saying more rudder, I got it. But it took me a while to realize the struggles of doing all of that when you're first starting out.
Yeah. What 2 or 3 things would you recommend every student pilot should be doing, either in the debrief or just day to day, to become a better pilot overall?
It's probably more than 2 or 3, but when you first started to unroll that for us, first thing that came to mind was you probably have to give up something in your life to take this on. If you're full-time students, okay, that opportunity might be there, but I'm guessing that as full-time students, you also have other work. I know you two do. I think at some point, if you really have got a fairly tight schedule and things like that, you may have to make a decision to cut something out to make time for this, because it is a heavy lift for people to take this on. And if you think about it, if you think about what we're teaching people to do, I don't think there should be any race to soloing. I think that's kind of a funny thing to see how quick somebody can solo. Okay, you're going from I've never been in an airplane before to possibly soloing thing in 10 to 15 hours. That's a pretty big deal. And I think, dedicating time to study and learn and ask questions, I think is certainly one thing. I think the other thing is don't be afraid to ask questions, because this idea that, oh, I don't want to, appear like, well, that's a silly question or something. We're there to ask questions. And even after teaching on the same airplane for 20 years, I still had questions about the airplane. And it's okay to ask. The other thing, a little bit more global though, is I would say is strive to be the best you can be. And Jeffrey used the word pride, and I think that's a big deal. I, generally speaking, would do kind of a self debrief, for every flight about what could I do better, and take that seriously in a crew environment, and especially in a teaching environment. You should do that. And I think the best thing a student can do for an instructor, but the instructor has to facilitate it. Have you worked with an instructor, you get done with the lesson and out comes the clipboard and he or she says, well, let's say we did this, and this. You need to work on this, and this. You know, you kind of go through this laundry list. That's actually not the way it should work.
Not helpful.
Not helpful. All you want to do is get out of there. You've heard enough. You've done enough. You're beat up. The best way to approach it, but again, the instructor needs to facilitate that, is to say, tell me how you think this lesson went,
Mhm.
and let the student do the debrief. That'll do two things. It'll be a reality check to see if we're all on the same page, but it will also give you some insight into what the student's thinking. As much as I think I can read people's minds, I can't do it all the time. So I need that input. And it's actually called facilitative debrief, is how we phrase that, where the instructor starts out by saying, tell me how you think that went. What were you thinking? And kind of just walk me through everything that happened. And you sit back and listen, and you'll learn a lot.
Yeah, that's really huge. I mean, I'm thinking of one particular flight where my instructor did do that, and I was like, "Oh, I thought that went horrible. Like, I did horrible." And he's like, "Well, no, there was this and this and this, but, overall, it wasn't horrible. There's just a few things." And
Hmm.
comes back to that kind of self, like, positivity and, like, "You'll get it next time," and it really is a huge, huge piece of it, and it really is encouraging to hear.
And the way the instructor needs to facilitate that is by telling the people we're working with that this is how we're going to do our debriefs. Because if they don't know what's coming and we all of a sudden turn the tables and say, well, tell me how that went, you think to yourself, oh my gosh, we did so much in the last 2 hours, I can't piece it all together. but, but if you start your flight out by knowing I'm going to have to debrief this, then your mind is set to do it. And I think that'll really help. Sounds like you've had experiences like that too, Jeffrey.
Even though I got through the RJ training by just showing up, shutting up, and getting through it, the reason I was debriefing is because I really wanted to get feedback in a particular way or show that instructor. It was my habit of debriefing myself,
Uh-huh.
in addition to having the instructor debrief me. And like you said, it comes from a sense of pride. I wanted to be able to make sure that I was always improving a little bit. And so I think that a student does need to have a certain sense of pride when it comes to doing things. But I also think it would be great for a student to have a sense of um, self-deprecating humor.
Oh
And
yeah, sure.
I wish I had maybe something will come up like that. But I've always found that being able to break the ice or say something funny is a way to crack through any kind of defensive wall that a person might have, even either from where they're coming from mentally or where they're coming from in terms of how they thought the flight went or how poorly they may see themselves. And so I think that for me, I know that when I crack a joke about something that I don't think went very well, it's a way to break the ice to help get some learning in. So as an instructor, I think one good thing as an instructor is to have a sense of humor, also to be a great listener, to be willing to listen to how the person is self-evaluating, and then be able to, based off that, then make the necessary corrections in their behavior in terms of flying the aircraft or navigating or communicating that will that the person will be open to receiving.
I use a simple formula. We have two ears and one mouth, so we should listen twice as much as we talk.
That's right. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. I was too busy listening.
And the pride thing I think goes to, if a person decides to become an instructor, there's all kinds of reasons that people want to do it. And certainly we all know that one reason that a person wants to become an instructor is to build time so they can move on to the next step. And I hear sometimes some criticism in the industry about that. Oh, well, they're just building time. You know what? We all have our reasons for what we do and why we do it. And if somebody says to me, I'm going to become an instructor because I really want to make a path into 135 or 121, and I'm using it as a way to build my hours. My response to that is, that's great. While you're doing that job, be the very best you can be and take pride in what you're doing, because if you you have an incident or an accident while you're not doing your job, you'll have to explain that at your interview, and it may not be that pleasant. So even if, hey, this is short term, I'm only going to do it for a year, year and a half, great, but be the best.
Even more sort of cynically, I had an instance where I instructed a young student, and 10 years later, um, they I had to go to them to get a recommendation to go to their airline.
Hmm.
And because they enjoyed my instructional technique and they got something out of it, and in addition to their licenses, I got a good recommendation from them. But imagine if you're an instructor and you're trying to build hours to go to the airline, and all you're doing is ticking boxes just so you can get there. And then suddenly you show up, there's a guy who's ahead of you who's looking at you at the interview, and he's a guy that you instructed. Well, how well is that interview going to go? So
Yeah,
I would just say
it's a
that
small world.
Mhm.
the aviation community is tiny. It's enormous, and it's tiny, and it's intimate, and it's at the same time. It's crazy how many people I've run into who know people who know people who know me, and it will always be that way because what, there are 330 million Americans currently, give or
Yeah.
take, and there are fewer than a million pilots. There are fewer than 600,000 who are current and active. So it's a very small percentage of people. And when you look at that, to understand that, that's why one should take pride in what they do, because we're a very small percentage of people on the planet who get to enjoy this really cool gift and to be able to hone this really cool skill that is magical and also deadly, right? So it's important to have a sense of pride as an instructor. It's important to be very cognizant of that this is a magical but also deadly thing that we do. And I also think it's really important for an instructor to be able to be empathetic but also tell the truth. One of my flight instructors I had the most respect for told me I wasn't ready for a check ride. And I was sure I was ready for a check ride. And he kept telling me, "Nope, you're not ready yet." And I was so adamant that I was ready. He said, "Okay, let's go do it. Let's go do a check ride before I schedule you with the DPE." And I didn't do well. I would have failed the check ride. And I have to say, the great thing about that was because he was honest, he wasn't mean, but he was firm. And that's what you really want in somebody who's trying to have you have a great set of skills, but also keep you alive.
The other part of this, we haven't touched on it specifically, but we certainly have baked it into this conversation. You teach the technical skills. We're good at that. Somebody can't land in the crosswind. Okay, eventually we can figure this out. So we teach the technical skills. But ultimately, flying the airplane's the easiest thing we do. It's everything else. And by everything else, it's being the part-time psychologist, it's being a listener, it's all the communication skills, they call them core competencies. And the core competencies are actually pretty clear. There's 9 of them. 5 of them are non-technical and 4 of them are technical. And we have to be able to understand how to teach those skills as well. And sometimes that's where some of these topics that we've been discussing come in, is how do we teach the soft skill parts of this. I once gave a talk to our class at the airline, and somebody raised their head and said, well, you guys meaning you guys in training, you seem to want a lot from us, us pilots. And I said, actually, we only want 2 things. For me, I only want 2 things. One is to respect each other and respect the procedures. And if we could just get those 2 things figured out, life would be easy.
You mentioned the core competencies and some of those soft skills. Do you
Hmm.
think that they can be kind of developed, or is it natural to a person?
No, they have to be developed. And I think they're developed by being a role model, setting good examples, and not downgrading the importance of them. If I were to put this into, like a more of a scenario based thing. So let's suppose you're sitting there watching an unstabilized approach in progress. Descent rates are more than it should be and things are a little bit ugly. Well, you can check the box that says so and so flew an unstabilized approach. But they all had a starting point and a reason for becoming unstabilized. It could be something as simple as this person has no scan, or it could be something like this all started with poor workload management. Workload management is a soft skill that you apply to a technical operation. So if you don't understand why something happened, you're missing a boat for a debrief and learning opportunity. I used to have people, instructors come to me and say, oh, so and so can't do a steep turn. I said, no, 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 no. Steep turn's not the issue. If they can't do a steep turn, it means they have no scan. So why don't we work on their scan techniques first and then apply it to the steep turn?
I agree with what Paul said, that it's 100% nurture. It's not nature, but it requires repetition. Requires all of these 5 soft skills require repetition, consistency, focus, and dedication. And if you do that, like practicing to play an instrument, you can develop these skills to a very high level.
Thank you guys both for sharing all your perspectives on mentorship in aviation. I think your insights were very, very valuable, and I know that, I'm going to use them, and I hope that everyone enjoyed. Yeah, so thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank you
Kate.
guys.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you, Katie. Yeah, Paul, is great. We should hang out more often. The 4 of us.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
Thank you for joining us on the Leading Edge podcast. We'll be releasing new episodes every month. If you'd like to become a sponsor or part of the future conversation, please reach out to us at nftaus.org.